Thanks everyone for joining today's webinar, an introduction to NSP APIs. My name is Darren Barr and I'm the Marketing and Business Support Manager for Learning Services here at Nokia. Our presenter today is Shane Branton, an NSP subject matter expert from our Learning Services team. Just to let you know, this webinar will be recorded and we'll make it available to you by email in the next few days. Please use the chat for any questions. Shane's going to go through just a few slides and then maybe 20-30 slides, and then we'll take some time for some questions, and then Shane's going to do some demoing, and hopefully we'll have a few more minutes to do some more questions after that. So I'm just going to take you through here just a quick overview of the NSP training program. So a lot of this content is coming for this presentation today is coming from our brand new NSP training program that's based on job functions that are aligned with the NSP software suites. You'll see as we go through in the next few slides, there's a number of flexible delivery formats with an emphasis on use cases. We still do have the NSP Classic Management, NFMP, which we're calling it, and then your newer NSP, which today's focus is based on. So coming new in Q3, and that would be coming up in September, or sorry, probably in September, a brand new automation certification. So this NSP currently is just a regular training program, but will become a certification program similar to our SRC certification program or ONC on the optical side. So this will be based on 4 different courses that you'll see we provide. So technology fundamentals, workflow design and management, programmable network automation, and intent design and management. So it'll be a one exam to become certified, probably about 80 questions. It can be done through Pearson VUE. So you'll start to see more information on this in the coming months. And our new NSP program, we've really taken a hybrid approach. So, whether you want to learn on your own or learn in the classic instructor-led format, we really do have everything here that's going to be able to meet those needs. So we've got everything is began with a web-based version of every course, and then an equivalent instructor-led version. And the instructor-led course just is a similar course, but obviously features instructors and hands-on labs to reinforce the theory. And another feature of the instructor-led training is we do have an open public schedule, so you can register for virtual training across multiple time zones. And of course, you can still do your classic private training. And then coming soon, we've DIY lab solution. This is a remote lab access to the NSP Network Developer Portal labs. These are complete with lab exercises. They can be used as a standalone, or they complement really nicely with the web-based training. So you'll see more information coming on that soon. So as I said, the training is focused by job functions aligned with the NSP software suite. So you've got your network programming, resource control, and network operations. So here below, you'll see a number of different courses. Not all are currently available in instructor-led format, but everything you see on this page is now available in web-based training. So these are all specific to whatever software suites you're using. And then what we call the foundational skills can apply across all the software suites. So we've got a class, an NSP overview course, and programmable network automation, a number of other different topics, as well as technology fundamentals, installation and configuration, system administration, all coming soon. So all you have to do is head over to our website, learn more about this. Everything's all in one place. Just a quick note too that our team supports also other learning services programs that we support, certification programs like the SRC program that I mentioned, the ONC or the Optical Network Certification Program, our new Data Center Fabric Certification Program, and then the Nuage Networks Virtuoso Certification Program for SDN. So with that, I'm going to pass things off to Shane to get things started.
Excellent.
Shane,
can you hear me, Darren?
Yep, I can now.
Excellent, perfect. All right, hello everyone. As Darren said, my name is Shane Branton. I will not go into too much details or any details about myself for this morning. SME basically for the NSP product. Been working on it for many years, and very happy to do so. As Darren already stated, my goal here today is I want to bring you through a little introduction on NSP APIs. I mean, it's only an hour and a half, so really just intro level type of material, and I'd like to bring you through a couple little demos. Really just bring up a tool and allow you to see some of the nice things you can do with the APIs. And if you have any questions, I'll try and answer them as best as possible. Like Darren already said, most of this information, or pretty much all this information, comes from the Programmable Network Automation course, which is one of the courses included in the new certification coming up, as well as Darren mentioned the do-it-yourself labs and the remote learning environment. So actually, the lab I'll be using today is actually one of those environments. So simply put, it's very quick to spin up. It's very convenient. So I thought it best to use one of those labs. So you'll really see how it's basically a full NSP lab with all the capabilities there. So. All right, so I'd like to get started. I do have some slides here. Anybody that knows me or have seen any demos or presentations in the past, I don't like to spend too much time on slides. So I'll probably try to go through them fairly quickly and then maybe get to some questions. And I really like to try and get to the hands-on stuff or the demo stuff and spend as much time there as possible. Okay, so just really wanted to start with a slide or two talking about the NSP and automation. Of course, a lot of people today, when they hear the NSP, automation is a very big theme with respect to the NSP and, of course, our certification. And really, we're really looking at three main areas that are open up, the avenues for automation. And one is, of course, the APIs, which we're going to talk about a bit here today. And then really the other areas you start to get into are workflows, so workflow management and design, as well as intent-based networking. So we have some great features in the NSP that has to do with intent-based networking. It's only really getting larger. So the nice thing is that really the three of these can really tie into each other in certain ways, and a lot of that is really by using APIs. So you can use APIs to access pretty much anything in the NSP, depending on how you want to program things or what products you want to use. Any type of OSS or BSS systems. So, and really, it's kind of what these bullets are saying here. So it's it's open programmable platform. We're looking at a level of abstraction. So abstraction is really important here, right? So especially in intent-based networking, we're able to really abstract all of those differences or extra little pieces that may make things a little bit more complicated. So we're able to abstract things and really simplify a lot of the underlying natures of the network or things that we're trying or operations that we're trying to do. And we were able to make them, a lot simpler by doing things such as, using APIs and especially intent-based networking. If you get into intent-based networking, abstraction is probably the most key feature there with respect to IBN. And then, the last point is if you're familiar with API with NSP, you're familiar with the fact that there's an integrated suite of applications. And like you'll see here today, using the northbound APIs, it really gives you that gateway into all of those great applications that you can use. Okay, so really looking at the bigger picture of the NSP. So as already mentioned, it is an open programmable platform, which you see there in the middle, and you have all these great applications. So, the applications are really broken into different sort of functionalities. So you have a lot of, you have some configuration provisioning apps. So you have a service fulfillment app, for example. You have some, ICM functionalities, and then some, you can do network configurations, for example. And then you have, some other applications like optimization applications, so IP/MPLS optimization. Then you have, fault management and network supervision, service supervision. You have all these different applications that can do many different things within your network. Analytics, for example, telemetry, and so forth. Down below, if you're not aware, of course, we have model-driven mediation. So with that platform, with that functionality, we're able to do management and many different functionalities across multi-layer. Okay, so anything that is model-driven, we can produce or develop specific adapters which can be installed in your network, which can allow you to manage and do certain functionalities on other boxes besides Nokia. So you can see below the other names as well. But one of the biggest pieces I want to mention here is really at the top. So you can see you see this thing here called, it says your own applications and, service orchestration, OSS and BSS. And that's really where your APIs come into play. So it's really kind of showing three lines here, but really what we have here is you can kind of look at the NSP APIs as kind of one single gateway or, an interface or whatever you want to call it, where it allows you could say other applications or another application that uses a particular architecture style, which we'll talk now in a minute, which is REST or REST-conf, and specific languages like JSON or XML, for example. And using that interface, using those APIs, we can really get access to all of this great functionality down here below. So, and because it's using programming languages and certain architecture styles like REST, we're able really to automate a lot of that stuff. So you can put a lot of that stuff in wrapper scripts. You can develop your own applications that have certain buttons, for example, that when you hit a certain button, it executes a particular API or multiple APIs. There's really a whole bunch of things you can do wrapped around automation there. And I'll talk about a lot of that going forward. So it's kind of really what you're going to see here today is sort of this, higher level piece here. And I am going to use an application called Postman, which really allows me to go in and run some of these APIs. So I guess, Postman kind of can be looked at as, one of your own applications or an OSS, for example. But, I understand most OSS or BSS are sort of higher level, and they're equipped with a lot of special functionalities. So let's just move on here. I want to talk about, of course, what is an API, and really an API is sort of a some people say, well, does it reside on the server side or the client side? Most of the work is definitely done on the server side, but it's really sort of a process of the client and the server. It's sort of a communication between both. So it is a client-server relationship, but really it's a single entry point, which allows you, like I showed you in the previous image, to really get in there and access all the consolidated suite of applications that the NSP has. So, and then through those applications, really get into and gather and look at the information or manipulate the information in the NSP database. So think about, anything you can do, like, provisioning a service, looking at alarms, configuring, hardware, doing policies, for example, workflows, intents, all of that stuff. We know you can do it through the GUI, of course, but you can also use programmable APIs to do all that stuff as well. Okay. Yes, it provides you a simplified view, and you'll see, just using an API, I can literally bring up an API and, specify one or two, say, service attributes. And, just by the click of a button, I can go ahead and, provision an entire service. And that's kind of similar on the intent side too, where we use it in abstraction to really only show us, particular attributes or, 2 or 3 required attributes that we may need, and sort of hiding all the underlying stuff. And then, just by clicking that one button, we can go ahead and provision that service. And then the last bullet point there, I've pretty much already said this a couple times. So it really unifies, well, everything. So, optimization, assurance, anything of that nature, it unifies, which of course helps with profitability and scalability. Okay, so looking at the definition of an API, really the official definition is a set of programming code that allows two systems or applications to talk to each other. So, of course, what I've already said, but the two systems that we're going to be looking at, one, of course, is the NSP, and then the other system, is the application that that you may be using, right? Whether it's, some type of command line interface, curl. I mean, there's many different ones out there. Postman interface, whether it be a UI driven, or your own customer OSS or BSS system that has REST architecture in place. All right, so at a high level, just kind of looking at what happens with respect to an API, or how is an API actually created. So typically, like you see on the left side here, we have a client, which I said is yourself or the OSS system. Postman in my case, which we'll see, and you simply send what's called an API request. So technically, what is an API request? Well, it really is equivalent to, say, something you would do in a UI, right? So it could be something as simple as you double clicking an alarm to bring up the details of that alarm. That is essentially a request, right? When you double click on that alarm, you're requesting to see the details of that alarm. Okay. Similar, you might be clicking that button to, say, deploy a service. So that is a request. So similar here, we will send an API request, and you can see we send it to the NSP IP address, right? And how is that API request created? Well, we're going to use a couple things. One, we're going to use a medium. Okay, and that medium is typically going to be either HTTP or HTTPS, okay, for more secure. And within that request, we're going to use some type of programming encoding format, right? So we're going to use some type of programming language in there. Now, typically, there's many different ones that can be used. There's JSON, there's XML, there's Perl, there's a bunch of other ones that you can use. Most times I see some of the more popular ones are JSON and XML, and that's really the ones that we provide. And you'll see now in a bit where I'll show that we provide access to sample API requests that you can use yourself, and those you will see in XML and or JSON. So all of that is sort of wrapped up and encoded using this medium and encoding format. Right. And by the way, everything you're seeing here, like the format, like needing, I'll talk about that in a second, needing a client, a server, a medium, and encoding format. All of this is really an architectural style. And this is where the whole REST and RESTconf comes into play. So basically, we send this request, which is encoded this certain way, and it hits the NSP server, right, which is our server side of things. And you can see here our server, like I mentioned, has all these applications. And of course, the NSP database where it's going to get all that information. Moving on, right? So we have the NSP. Then, of course, once the NSP gets that request, validates that the request is valid, and then it basically goes ahead and does what it needs to do, whether it's grab the information in the database, or configure something in the network. It will then respond, and we'll talk about API responses. So the responses may be different depending on what your request is. If you're looking for specific information, you'll get that information back. If you're configuring something, you may just get a response code back to you that says, yep, it's okay, it's configured, so it really depends on what your response is. Okay, so again, just sort of like a high level. So number one is basically somebody sitting. The nice thing is it's over, basically over the internet. So, I could be sitting here in my home, for example, and I can run an API request. If I have access or just as long as I have authentication rights, I can send an API request to, an NSP or a server, which is located, elsewhere over the internet. Number two is, of course, it receives the request. Okay, and then number two actually, and three is really a joint between, accessing the different types of applications and then accessing information in the database. And really, I guess technically you could have another one here, sort of a 3B, which would then really be, moving forward and accessing, say, routers or some other type of hardware equipment there. So, could access database and then actually provision equipment. And then 4 is then finally, the response that comes back. And then You could even have a 5 here, which could be, the user maybe going and validating certain things using the NSP, which, I've done lots of times as well. So sometimes I'll use APIs to configure something because it may be easier. And then, number 5 is simply me going in and then, moving forward then with some of the NSP applications and working from there. Okay, so with the NSP APIs, I already briefly touched on sort of the architecture, and really the NSP provides 3 main types of APIs. And when I say types, it's really the architecture, and it's how the API, like the request and the response and everything, needs to be set up. So there's certain constraints and certain ways things need to be built. And I mean, like certain parameters that need to be specified, the way that authorization is performed and set up, and how security is maintained. All that stuff is sort of the architectural style of things. And there are really, well, 2 top or main types that are used today. Well, 3, I guess, if you want to include XML, but XML is sort of the older style, if you want to call it. And you can see the very last point there is the XML API consists using mainly SOAP or XML over HTTP. So it's not sort of what you typically will see today, which is sort of your JSON style of API requests. It sort of uses SOAP and XML. So really, the reason why we say the NSP platform provides 3 main types of APIs, well, the XML APIs are sort of the older style. And when I say older style, a lot of the information that was generally gained through accessing the older NFMP style of information or network management really used the sort of SOAP XML. So if you're really looking for some of that information, you may still need to use some XML APIs. However, you can still gather pretty much most of that information using the newer style. So really, the XML APIs are still there today, really sort of for the backwards compatibility. So to any existing OSS systems. But then, over time, you will want to get that OSS system, sort of more modern, and using the more modern platformed API types, which will be the REST and the REST conf. Okay. So really lots of times when people talk about this, they say, well, what is the differences between REST and REST conf? Now, there are a few differences between REST and REST conf. To be honest, most of the differences are really minor. If you do a simple Google, say, for example, on REST and REST conf, a lot of them are really, really minor. However, there is one major difference, and it's basically the reason why RESTconf came into play. And it's because RESTconf, when REST was originally designed, it wasn't designed around Yang modeled objects. Okay, so it really wasn't designed using, things like leaves and nodes, for example. So it wasn't able to map a Yang modeled object. So of course, today now we're using a lot of, we're getting into model-driven network elements. So we needed an architecture style where we could run APIs that could model, the leaves, say, for example, of a Yang modeled object. So that's where REST comes into play. So basically, it is a REST architecture that was basically modified where we could now model and gather information from a Yang model object. So basically, if you're in a network and you're running, your network is all, if it's not model driven, if it's all, basically using, SNMP, for example, yeah, I mean, you could basically do most everything using REST. But I mean, if you're in there using some of the newer NSP functionality that does use, Yang model information, you will have to go into REST to REST conf. Today, really, in a lot of networks we're starting to see now is really both, right? Because we're starting to see people start to get into model driven. So they still have a lot of the SNMP managed devices in there, but then they're starting to bring some stuff on with MDM. And what we've done, and I'll see now in a second when I go into the Developer portal is, we've made it quite easy for you to recognize, whether you need to do a REST or a REST-conf call, depending on, what functionality or what application you want to use within the NSP. So don't really worry about this too much, because with respect to the NSP, we've helped you along the way to make it a little bit easier. So. Okay, so this kind of looks at the NSP architecture. So if you remember the first image I showed you, which had the cloud and it said, using your own applications, this kind of really just breaks down the NSP side of things, right? And it just really highlights the power of the REST and the REST-conf APIs and what I've already stated, which is the fact that, the APIs give you access to basically everything in the NSP world. So, and yeah, you could do, using APIs, you can do a whole bunch of, closed loop automation. You can really tie everything together here. And what I mean is you can take multiple API requests and you can, wrap them all together in, some type of Perl script or something, for example, which we've done in the past, or Python. And you can also, one application down here, Workflow Manager, which I don't go into today, but one great thing about the Workflow Manager is you can actually create a workflow. And in that workflow, you can insert, one or many API requests. So, in that workflow, you can say, at this point in your workflow, go and provision, provision something, or go and look at alarms, or go and, find the details of something and publish it to, a certain area or whatever. I mean, so basically any type of API you can place in a workflow. So you can see how you can really start to combine both of these. And if you look at APIs, well, I can run APIs on, pretty much anything, right? Service fulfillment, cross-domain coordinator, IP, optimization. There's a whole bunch of things that I can run APIs on. And again, I'll show you in the developer portal where it makes it much easier to understand, well, really the specifics of things that I can do with APIs. Okay, so just getting that a little bit further. Again, you look at the model-driven mediation, which I've already touched on. So using APIs, of course, we can also communicate. I've mentioned netconf, right? So that would be using the REST-conf API because it's Yang model devices. But then, of course, using REST, I can, look at SNMP modeled, CLI modeled, and, using REST-conf, I can also do telemetry, which is GNMI as well. So really just kind of looking at the fact that you can basically do, anything using APIs. Okay, so I mentioned REST is really an architecture style. So basically how the API or the architecture of the API is made up. And when talking about REST APIs or REST-conf APIs, you may hear some terms. And some of those terms you'll hear is maybe resource, representation, and endpoints. So lots of times, if you start looking at APIs or API documentation, some of the things you'll definitely encounter or you'll need to know right away is, what is the resource, what are the endpoints, and, when do we need to change them, and what is the representation? So I have a slide a little bit later, which will highlight it a bit easier for you. But for right now, I just have some definitions here. So, what is a resource? Well, it's basically an object that has data associated to it. It says, they're identified by a URL. Well, in actual fact, they're actually identified by a part of a URL, and you'll see that a bit. Really, an endpoint is kind of identified by the entire URL. And to be honest, it actually depends a little bit on, it's a sort of a gray area. It really depends on who you talk to. Like if you go on Google and stuff and search, you might see someone that says, well, the end, like it's almost reverse sometimes, like the endpoint is part of, but we look at it as the endpoint is sort of the entire URL, and we reference the resource as part of the URL. And I'll show you how you can see that a little bit easier once you get in, you start looking at our API documentation, which is called Swagger. So an endpoint is really the point of entry. So for example, if I want to run an API call, I need to know the exact endpoint of what I'm trying to reference. So what I mean is, let's say I want to run an API call that gathers all the details of a specific alarm and returns all those details back to me, right? So, is it critical? What is a probable cause? What is, the object and so forth? Is it acknowledged and whatever? I need to know the exact endpoint. When I see endpoint, the endpoint is basically specified by an HTTP request. So that might be HTTP, an IP address of the NSP server, and then it's going to have, all of these directories, but right, which is, all your slashes. So slash, something slash, fault management slash whatever, and it's going to basically pinpoint. So what is it? It's pinpointing exactly where in that database that specific information lies that I want to receive. Okay, so that's really the endpoint, and the resource are all of the specific pieces in that endpoint. So how do I find that precise alarm that I want to get the details for? Okay, so and then a representation is basically what I'm sent back. So when I send a request, I'm asking for a representation of that request. So using the same example, I send a request which says, give me the details of that alarm. Well, I'm going to get sent back the representation of that alarm. So the server is going to send me back a representation of that alarm. So it's going to be basically a chunk of information, and it's a representation of all the details of that alarm. So I'm going to get details that come back in a certain format, which will typically, in our eyes, we'll see it'll be in JSON format, and it'll say all the details. So I'll get probable cause, the severity, whether it's critical, and so forth. Okay, now that's if I'm asking for the details of something. I may be provisioning something, and then the representation is going to be a little bit different. So here's what I mentioned about it kind of makes things a little bit easier. So if you look at sort of the URL here, this is something like you will see in, say, your application. So if I program an application to, say, run an API call, in that programming, I will need to put in the exact endpoint of that API call. And you'll see that in a second, right? So when I run an API call through Postman, I'm actually going to have to put in the exact endpoint of the API call that I'm trying to run. So for, say, a fault management, you'll see that most of the fault management, anything to the fault management application, is going to have almost the exact same, half of the endpoint, say, for example, probably right up to, in this case, say, Ontario. Now, it obviously won't be Ontario, but up to this point is going to be the same. You're going to get, HTTP or HTTPS, depending on if you're using, REST or RESTCONF or some type of security mechanism. Then you're going to see, obviously this XYZ movies is going to be replaced by your NSP server IP address. So that's your domain. And then you're going to see a standard sort of first part of the resource, and that's going to be, we'll see REST or REST/v1, which is sort of the version, and then you might see, fault management, and then that's sort of where your API starts, and then from there, the rest of it is really going to be pinpointing where that one specific alarm is. So then you're going to see, maybe something that says alarms and then slash, and then you're going to see the actual, alarm ID, for example, if you want to get that one alarm. So again, this will become more clear once I get into running in the demo, when I start running some of the API calls. So you can see here the resource, right? So in this case, the resource is sort of part of the URL, right, or the endpoint. So, which is really the specific part, not including the domain of where do I find that exact piece of information that I want to look for. So where is that object that I'm trying to find, right? Or where is that function that I'm trying to find, right? And you can see in this case, this individual was really just looking, they did a get. So I'll talk about those operations in a second. So doing a get, you're really just looking for information, right? You're not actually manipulating anything. You're not doing any configuration. You're just saying, show me, or I want to gather information about a certain resource in the database. And that's what they did. In this case, they're looking for information on a particular movie. That REST API call goes over the internet. It hits the movie database, right? And then comes back in the form of a representation. So the representation in this case, you can see comes back and it says, well, Avengers Endgame is playing in this city at this certain time, right? And you can see actually what you're seeing here is actually encoded in a JSON format. But then, of course, on the client side, their web tool may then take this information and provide it in a nice, much prettier format with a nice table, and it basically takes this and then decodes it and puts it in a nice format that they can see it. And that's basically, you probably most likely never knew it, but you've probably been using APIs multiple times when you've been on the website, searching or browsing. And again, you never knew that in the background, all of these APIs are running. So it just gives you an idea on the type of programming that you can do. This is an example of a different type of representation you may get. So this is one where the user is actually doing some type of put or post call where they're actually manipulating something in the database. So they actually wanted to manipulate or update a form. It doesn't have it here, but this would be a put or a post type. In the original, it was a get operation. So here, though, they're not asking for information. So they're changing something in the database. So if that's the case, you'll see that the representation now is going to be a little bit different, right? So you can see the representation format can change. And it basically changes depending on the type of operation you perform. So in this case, we're not asking for information back. We're just basically asking for a representation of the state, meaning let us know, whether my manipulation was successful or not. So in this case, it really just comes back. It comes back with a status code, which is 200 OK, which you'll see in a second. And it says, your form was updated successfully. Okay, so really the representation is just what you get back in return. RESTconf API, again, don't go into it too much, only because it's really, the format is exactly like this. It has the same type of idea where it has the endpoint, it has resources, it has, client server, everything. It even has a representation. The only real difference is that now you'll see that once it hits the server side, I'm now able to access data that is in the database that is defined by Yang. Okay, that's really the only major difference using RESTconf. So they really work the same way. Okay, because REST is the basis, the underlying architecture that it uses. It's just that it can access things defined in Yang. Okay, so I mentioned one request method there. There was one mentioned get in a slide. I mentioned a couple other ones. And you'll see every type of API request. It really uses the CRUD architecture, and RESTconf actually uses a couple other ones as well, like put, for example, and options, for example, are some extra ones. But here are the request methods you'll see. And every API request that is done needs some type of method attached to it. Okay, so I'm not going to go down through all of these ones. But some of the most common ones you'll see obviously is get. Get is just gathering information. So if you want to retrieve information about something, you're using a get method or get operation. The other most important, mostly used ones are post. So post is basically creating something. So if I want to create a new service, if I want to create a new user or anything I want to create new, typically I'm going to use post. Okay, then of course I have this, you can see delete, right, which is very, obviously it's just the opposite of post. I'm going to come back to put, by the way. You notice I jumped over it. Patch is really updating something. So, it's already there. So maybe I just want to change, an attribute. So maybe I want to change service MTU or, something of that nature, change an attribute of a port. Put is a little bit different. Put and post are very similar. But you'll see a little bit different here. So post will actually, it doesn't first check to see if the object already exists. So it's really just create it, no matter what, under any circumstance, just create it. Whereas put, I will actually check and see if the resource is there first. And then if it doesn't exist, then only then will it create it. So it actually does a full replace. So if, basically what it is, it's like, it's kind of like, so I guess in a way you might have to be careful, because if you use post and you constantly use post, it will continually create another object, sort of like a similar object. But again, I'm not going to get into too much. I don't really have time to go too deep into these. A simple Google search, for example, will give you, some great examples on the differences between, post and put. But most times, if you're creating something first off, like a new service, for example, you will use post. Response codes, again, I'm not going to get into all of them, but some of the most common ones you will see is definitely 200 OK, which is just sort of like a standard response. 201 created. If you're using, most times if you're using post, you will see 201 created, which is a response that comes back, of course, to let you know that it was successfully created. Unauthorized is another big one. We're going to talk about authorization very quickly before I get into the demo. Okay, so if your token or authorization has expired, you will get a 401 on unauthorized back. So knowing these codes are very important, because it really gives you an idea on what your, if you get an error from your API, really what your problem is, right? So bad request is typically something is the server cannot process. So typically there's probably something wrong with your API, like a syntax problem, or, I've done it before many times where I have an extra, bracket or comma or something in my code, or a parameter that's incorrect or something of that nature. So knowing these codes really do help you. Okay. So, we've listed some of them there. There are more, right? And you can get a whole list of them on the web, but these are definitely the more common ones that you will see. Okay, a couple of things I need to mention before, and you need to understand if you get into the API world, the biggest one is authentication termination. So just like anything, if you go on your UI, you have to log into the NSP. So very similar nature for security purposes. The NSP APIs, they REST and RESTconf, they use a specific authentication system, okay? And then they have what's this called location services, which I will also mention in a minute. So the authentication system, really what we use is, so we have basic authentication, which is a little bit more complex, because you would actually have to run your basic authentication every single time you ran a request, which can be a little bit tedious. But then we also have what's called the bearer token authentication, which is typically the one that's used. It's much quicker. It's easier to kind of maintain. Anyways, it's, again, I can't get into it too much, but you'll see it when I run the demo. But what you will need to understand is how it works. So what I want to do is, so this is what's called the refresh token. So we have basically an authorization, which you get what's called a token. And if you see down here below, you'll see this access token. So you get this encoded string, right? And that is now your authorization. So what happens is you initially send off an authorization request, and you say, I would like access through, to the NSP system, through all the APIs. And when you do that using, your admin user, say, for example, and your ID. Or if there's another NSP user that's created, you use that login and password. And you're going to get this token then returned. So then what happens is then you use this token, and that can be done through automatic. You'll see that in Postman. You then use this token as your login for the rest of your API requests. Okay, and then all of a sudden, then it's like you're in, and now you're automatically in. And so just as long as you use this token, this string, in the rest of your requests, you'll be fine. Okay, if you use a different one, well, you won't have access. Okay, now the thing is that using this token will only last for 3,600 seconds. So that's 1 hour, right? So after 3,600 seconds, it will expire. Okay. And you can only have up to, at the same time, 50 bearer tokens issued. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, 50 might talk like a lot, but if you have a bunch of, depending on the size of the customer, you may have a bunch of different OSS and BSS platforms in there that are running, concurrent API requests. So there may come a point where you need to manage, how many bearer tokens, or need to be aware of how many bearer tokens are available, because if all 50 are used and somebody tries to come in and get access, they'll get a response that comes back, basically telling them that they're not authored to use it. So how can we do this? Well, one of the easiest ways to do this is to use two things. One is a revoke and one is a refresh. So a refresh is a good way to basically extend the access token. So I said the access token ends at 3,600 seconds. So what a lot of BSS or OSS systems will do is they will automatically program into their system that before 3,600 seconds is up, okay, so whether it be, they'll just say, at the 3,500 second range or whatever, it will send off what's called an API to refresh the token. Okay, and then what'll happen is that it sends off the API requests, and then they get sent back a new token, which essentially refreshes the initial token. So what am I doing? I'm keeping that initial session open. And why is that important? Well, if I don't do a refresh, let's say after 3,000 seconds or 2,000 seconds, if I go in and if I actually, instead of refreshing, if I send off a new initial authorization instead, well, now what I'm going to do is what? I'm actually going to have two sessions open concurrently. So I'm actually going to have a session open that's actually still open for another, 1,000 seconds. That's not even being used anymore. And it'll just sit there until it times out. So you got to be careful, because you don't really want that going on. So, and how I'll show you, kind of use this diagram here to give you an idea maybe on what I mean. Now, this really only gets into using 4 or 5 concurrent sessions, but, let's say that this this setup, I said it has 50 concurrent. Let's say the setup really only had, say, a maximum of 4 concurrent APIs. Well, so what you have here is an instance where, so a user comes in, they get 1 token, and you can see that at around this point here, this line, another user comes in, gets 2 tokens. So we have 2 concurrent users. A third user comes in. This guy here refreshes, which is great. That's perfect, right? You can see they refreshed their token before the 3,600 was out, which extended their token usage, right? This person here comes in, a second user, then a third user comes in, then a fourth user comes in, right? Fourth user. But then all of a sudden, this guy here comes in, okay, token 5. And typically what will happen is, if this user here came in at token 5, if we only had a maximum of 4 concurrent NSP APIs, this user here would not be able to get in. Okay, so, but let's say that what happened, let's say the second user here, let's say at this point right here, this user was done his or hers work, and they said, I'm done my work now. But what they do is they leave the session open. They forget to revoke their token. So that's a key thing, right? You may want to build into your programmable APIs, is that, probably the last API request that you will build into your set of API requests is a revoke. Right. So the first thing is to get access, you run all your individual APIs, and then last thing is a revoke. So that's really important to revoke it, because if you do that, if this person actually terminated it right here, well, then now when this 5th user came into play, they would then get access, right? Because this token is no longer open. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Whereas if this user didn't terminate their token, just because they're not using it, it's still open, and it would still be open. It would still taking up a spot until that 3,600 seconds elapses. So it's very important to actually build in and, terminate that token with a revoke API request when the user, or when you are actually done all the API requests. So using that, coming in, things like refresh and terminate are very important for, really only keeping the amount of necessary API bearer tokens used. Location services, so not much here, but really what this is, you can send off, so I mentioned all the resources, so which is really where do all these objects lie in the NSP and how do I access them? Really, what is the exact URL that I need to use in my API request? Well, obviously there's a whole ton of objects and applications in the NSP. So you're probably thinking, well, how do I know exactly, what is the correct URL? So there's two main ways of doing that. One is you can find the location using what's called Swagger documentation, which I'll show you in a minute. The other is you can actually run an API call to the NSP location service. It's called location services. Now, you're going to get a very large response back, but what you can do is you can do a text search in that response. So let's say, for example, I'm looking for, how do I access the information for an alarm? Well, I can run an API request to location services, and then I can run a text search for, the word alarm or alarms or something like that. And in that response, I should be able to find the exact URL, or at least the base URL that I need to use to access that information. So again, you'll see that now in a minute. Let's see how my time is going here. So I have about 40 minutes. So I'm going to go through this very quickly because I want to get through to a quick demo. Functional areas of NSP. I'll show you this in a minute. This really just shows how all the NSP APIs are broken down into certain areas that allow you to access them. Okay, same with RESTconf API. And I'm not going to mention too much about Postman, which I've already sort of mentioned, but really Postman is it is a free client you can gain online, you can download. I'm sure there are a bunch of other API clients that you can also use. Postman is just one we've used quite a bit in the NSP world and in Nokia. So because of that, we actually provide sample API requests that you can use to play with this and use to develop your own APIs. And then you can, of course, export them and import them into other tools as well. But it is a very nice tool. It has some great functionality in play that you'll see in a bit that I will mention as well. So I'm not going to go into too much about this now. I'll show you as soon as I bring up the application. So Darren, I think this might be I don't have too much time, but maybe just a couple minutes. I'm thinking I may want at least maybe 30 minutes to at least show a demo, or at least 20 or 25 minutes. So I think, how do you want to do this, Darren? Do you want to,
well,
if somebody
I'm not
has
seeing any questions just yet, so I suggest just going ahead.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Unless somebody has one now, if they want to place their question, I can... let's give maybe 30 seconds or somebody if anyone has a question. If not, I can get into the demo. Perfect. So a couple of things I'm going to show you here before I get into the demo. So we already mentioned the lab service. So in order to access a lot of the labs, what I'm using is the Nokia developer portal. So this has many great functionalities that can help yourself or anybody and want to get into NSP and automation, for example, or even there's some great optical stuff in here as well. The main features that we're going to see here today is the resource feature. So under resources, if you go NSP, you'll see this great API documentation. So I said that we've done a great job of sort of organizing a lot of this for you. Now, some of the APIs may change depending on some new features, for example, that come into play. But I will tell you, a lot of these APIs are backward compatible. So, unless it's not accessing like something that's very new or a new feature. So I know for a fact that, I can go in here and I can run some of these, 2111 or 22.3 APIs on a 22.6. So just because it says, you don't necessarily need to be using the latest and greatest APIs, but I will say using the latest and greatest APIs will ensure that, all of them will work and at least all the newer functionality is there, right? So of course, something like ICM, which is, brand new in 22.6, you're not going to see any APIs in ICM down here in 21.6 or 21.3. So my network that I'm using is 22.6. That's why, I'll simply click on 22.6. So, for you, depending on what version of NSP, you'll simply just, click on the release of the NSP that you're using. Now, when you do this, I had a slide there saying all the different NSP functionalities. So we've also made it much easier for you, as I've said, and we've broken it up into different categories. So instead of just kind of clicking a button saying, here's all your NSP APIs, and you can actually do that, by the way, you can, they're working on it right now because 22.6 just came out not too long ago, but there actually will be a zip file here if you want to be a little bold, and you can download the whole zip file of them. They're actually put into different zip files, and you can actually import them that way. So that's fine, and I've done that as well. It might be a quicker way to do it if you actually want all of them. But if you're really only looking for certain specific ones, you can, they're all broken up for you here. So you can see some of the ones that I made. So access and authentication, right? So that's, what I just talked about. So obviously that's going to have in there your getting your bearer code, right? It's going to have an API call that's already created and ready for you to do your refresh token or your revoke the token, right? Terminate your API call. Things like, user activity. If you want to view a log, session manager. So sessions, authenticate passwords, for example, looking at the different types of sessions that are there right now. User groups, creating users, creating groups. You can see pretty much everything is here, like device discovery, right? Bringing routers online, device configuration, right? So changing anything with respect to the devices, infrastructure configuration management, like it's all here. You go down through here, everything I've mentioned, the NSP, all those great applications. Look, full service fulfillment, provisioning services, right? All fault management, service supervision, network supervision. It's all in here. Telemetry, everything. But the nice thing, like I said, is that we've actually organized it for you here, and we've actually given you an easier way to download or import just the smaller subset of the APIs that you're looking for. So I'm actually going to go ahead and do that. Before I do that, I will mention just the labs. So I am using one of the labs available on the developer portal. Now, Darren mentioned that we are going to have available that if you do some, and I'm saying some, but it will be for almost all of our courses. If you do our courses, the WBT versions, we have available a do-it-yourself lab option where, so let's say you do the programmable network automation course, then you can basically book a do-it-yourself labs. And actually what will happen is it'll automatically spin up one of these labs for you. It'll actually be a similar lab that I have here today, where you'll then be able to go and download all these great APIs. You'll have a document, and it'll guide you through a bunch of do-it-yourself examples that you can get through. So I'm actually using one of these labs. And you can see here, if I go into NSP lab catalog, it'll give you a list of all different labs you can run. But I actually have a lab up and running, and you can see what happens when you spin up the lab. You're going to get, all your great access details, password, admin password, login, and you get a nice URL, which will then bring up your NSP. And that's actually, what I have here right now. So this is my network. Okay, that I'm looking at, and I'm just here in a network supervision application because we're going to use that for our demo. So the first thing I said is, here's a Postman application. Like I said, you don't need, it's a free application. You can create a Postman account if you wish. Really, the benefits of creating a Postman account is you can create what's called a workspace, which it kind of saves everything in the cloud. So then you can actually use it like an online version and such, and you can go from platform to platform. But if you're just using sort of like a local version of Postman, you don't really even need to create an account. You can just, download it and use it freely. Now, in here, I can import collections, or I can, create my own. I can create, mock API servers to run tests of my APIs. But what we're going to do today is the nice simple stuff that I've already mentioned to you, is the fact that I can go to resources, NSP, API documentation, and I'm going to just simply import some of the great APIs that I'm going to need. So, of course, the very first one I will need is this access and authentication. So you'll notice if I click on this, okay, over here, it has a list of the API calls that are included, that are already created and ready to go, that you can import in this zip file or subset of API requests. And here they are here. But if you notice over here, there's this nice little button. Okay, and I can say run in Postman. And you'll notice if I'm using the Postman for web, so like I said, if you do have an account and you're using it, that's fine. Or I can say Postman for Windows, and I do have Postman for Windows installed. So I'm going to say Postman for Windows. It's going to go over here, and you can see very easily it imported the set of API calls me. So nice and easy. You can notice an import button. So if you did actually download the zip file with the whole collection there, I can import it, the zip file there as well. Okay, so a couple of other things I want to mention before I go running some of these calls is the Swagger documentation. So I'm just going to run into here. Swagger documentation actually gives you, I talked about all the resources and how do I locate everything within the actual APIs. So this is a nice point and click service which allows you to really go down through sort of the architecture and layout of all the APIs. So sort of the tree architecture or the URL architecture. So you can see here if I click on post authentication, this is to revoke a token. You can see it comes down here. It gives me some sort of the additional layout of the actual call. Okay, and then any type of attributes that I can actually include there as well. Okay, there's getting my token, so it really lays out location. You'll see one in a minute that I'm going to use. All the get calls I can do. I mean, it's laid out for you nicely. You can use this to try and develop your own APIs, which you'll see in a minute. Okay, so one of the other things I'm going to do, I'm going to run over to my Postman application now, and a couple things I want to mention in Postman. So environments. So if I actually click on initial authentication, you'll see the API call is basically ready to go for me. And you'll see right away, though, it's included so it has HTTPS, and then it has this bracket server bracket. So when you see that, this is how you create what's called a variable in Postman. And now when you see I hover over it, it actually already has the variable highlighted for me. Now, if you don't want to use a variable or anything like that, yes, of course, I could remove this and I could just simply manually enter in the IP address of my server. Now, the only problem is if I do that, every single API request I do, if I click on any of these, you'll see, right, they all have a server, right? Well, I'm going to have to manually change that. So the easiest thing for me to do is create what's called an environment and create an environment variable, which really then allows me to, I might have multiple NSP setups, or, in your live network, you might have multiple NSP networks, and it'll then allow you to actually use the same API request, but simply run it from, on different NSP setups. And then you can do that by creating different environments. So over here is a button which allows me to have a quick look, okay, at my environments. You can see here, drop down, I can change between environments. Okay, I only have one environment created, and that's one I created for this demo, and I just called it NSP automation. And when you have an environment, you can see I can create certain environment variables. So that's where I created this variable, I called it server, and I gave it the value. So that's why when I hover over that server value, it automatically puts in that IP address for me. So, depending for me, if I spin up a certain lab, if it's a cloud lab, I may have a different IP address, and for the NSP server, it might assign a different IP address to it. And if it does, I will simply just edit this, and then I just change the actual value. Okay, so it's pretty simple, like I said, and you can have other variables in here. The one thing I do like, though, is that there are some variables that actually get set automatically, and I love this because it will set the token value automatically or the refresh token automatically. So all I really need to do is really run the initial authentication once to get my token. Now you can see this token here. It says, it ends with, GI2, right? So you'll see now in a second when I run the initial authentication, not only is it going to get that initial bearer token for me, but it's actually going to go in and it's going to update this token for me, which means any of the rest of my APIs that I run in Postman, that as soon as I say use bearer token authentication, it's now automatically going to use this token for me. I will not have to go and manually enter that token. So that's very nice. Okay, so let's actually go in here to the initial authentication API. And there's not much actually in here. You'll see authentication. This is the first time I'm running my authentication, so I can't use bearer token. You can see there is a bunch of other authentication types that you can use. So I'm going to use basic authentication. I'm going to use admin. And I believe, if I haven't pasted it already, this is basically going to be the authentication that you would get right here, right? So in your lab. So that's your password, your launch pad password right there, okay? So there's my password. So let's go ahead and send this and see what I get. Oh, invalid client. So I probably, let's see here. So 202.226, probably this, Control C. Yeah, so it was that because it looks like it's different automatically. There we go. So once I pasted in that new password, you can see now that I'm now given an access token. So remember our other access token was GI entity and GI2. This is now JY3. So you'll see that if I look at my environment variables, see that right away. So it automatically now, the token got updated to GY3, and that's because I put it into what's called, it's in a global variable. So anything in a global variable, if you run an API that actually gets that token, it'll automatically update that global variable. Okay, so that's great for me in this instance because now I can go and I can run any other API using a bearer token, and I know for the next 3,600 seconds it's okay. And that will be able to run successfully. Remember, though, after 3,600 seconds, it's either going to expire. So let's say if I'm using it and I go for lunch and I come back and I try to run an API, call, it's going to try and use this. Well, it's going to come back and it's going to say no authentication. So I will then need to re-authenticate, and that will get me up and running for another 3,600 seconds. However, what I could do is before I go to lunch, right, I could run a refresh, and I could, run a refresh if I wish. I could run a refresh request. Okay. You can see this authentication refresh token here. I could simply click on this, run it, and it'll actually update my token. So, and I'll now then have access for another 3,600 seconds. Okay, so that's how that goes. So now that we have our authentication, what I'd like to do is I'm going to run down to location services here quickly. And you can see now, if I wish, I can just change this to bearer token. Notice when I change this to bearer token, and I hover over token here, it now has my updated token. And as I said, because the API is all set up for you, I don't need to go in and change anything else. I can say send. And this one takes a minute or so, because the request, like I said, is quite large. It's literally going to send me back the entire database of all the API requests and paths and everything that I can use. There we go. So you can see I get this. If you remember the response code, so 200 OK is awesome. We like 200 OK. It's a response that we hope we get most of the times. Okay, so there we go, 200 OK. That's a good one. But now we have, all this data, right? That's in, this format, right? This JSON format here. I can see I can change the format if I like. But what I can do is that within this, I can, search. So I can say, QoS policy, for example, right? So I can say, if I'm looking for a QoS profile, and I can kind of go down here and I can say, well, there we go. So if I'm looking for a specific, this type of QoS profile here, it will help me, find certain types of, if I want to go in and change the subscriber override policy. Well, it tells me, look, this is how I'm going to have to build that API request. So it's going to have to be HTTPS server, right? Okay, REST API, and then here, REST API, and then the rest of it's going to have to be V2. So notice here, right? V2, all of this to here. There we go. And then I can build my API from there. So this is how I get an idea on how to actually build, where's the location or what is the specific resource of a particular object that I'm looking for. You can see that it also tells you, so anything right here, if I'm looking for, authentication keys or anything of that nature, the effective base URL is this. And then once I want any more specifics, I then complete the rest of my URL, right, my response with, say, this, if I'm looking for this specific object, or if I want to do this or this, if I'm looking for an instance or a site or some other type of object. Okay, now that's one way. To be honest, I find I like this because, the Swagger documentation is there. And, if I click on this, for example, or if I click on, let me go down to network. So if I click on this, for example, I know I'm only going to be looking at, the so-called location services for the fault management application. So I'm really only going to be looking at a smaller subset of the information, which, yes, definitely makes it a little bit more manageable. But like I said, the location services is there, and I have used it definitely a couple times to search for something. So it's always there to help you along. So that's what the authentication, or sorry, the location services is. So let's now get into actually running an API and doing something on a network. So it's funny, I just said, fault management. What I'm going to do is, you'll notice here that right now they actually don't have an actual Postman link updated for that yet. So actually, I'm going to run back to 22.3 here. Okay, they're in the process of getting it put together and getting it up and running. And let's see. Actually, you know what? No, I'm going to go and do let's do the inventory first. So let's do the inventory first. So API, and let's go network infrastructure management, network supervision. So let's go look at network supervision inventory retrieval first. So I'll do this one first, and I'll show you the fault management and how we can use Swagger. So let's see, what am I looking at? So I'm looking at about 19 minutes. That's good. So, okay, so running Postman, we've seen this already. Open Postman, right? And this should import. There you go. You can see nice and quick, it's imported these set of APIs. Okay, so you can see here just a whole bunch of stuff, right? If you know network supervision, there's a lot of work you can do within network supervision. But really, one of the easy ones, if we're just running a real easy one here, is get network elements. So this is just going to run an API get request to network supervision and say, please return back to us a list of the network elements that are in network supervision. Okay, so looking at here, I can set my authentication to bearer token, right? Variable 0, I don't need to do anything else. You notice there's nothing in the body, and the body would typically include like any other parameters. Okay, you'll typically see maybe something if you're doing a filter, or if you're doing like a post, if you're creating something like creating a service or creating something of that nature, is typically where you will see parameters. Parameters will be something like, setting MTU size and that nature. But I just want, get all network elements. So you can see here is the actual endpoint, right? This is basically all I'm doing. I'm doing a get operation to this endpoint to get all this information right here. So let's just send this and see what we get back. So excellent, right? We get a 200 OK, we get a status back. And here's all our information. Now, if I were to go down through this, you can see all the great attributes of our network elements. You can see the FDN, which is, here's one network element with a system ID of 10.10.10.6. The name is SR6 and so forth. So using this, I could now, in coding or in workflows, I could publish all of this information to use in workflows, say, for example, right? Because now I've gathered it, and then I can publish it and actually input any of this information into workflows. And that's used a lot. Sometimes I want to go and I might need to go and gather the system IP address for a certain router, or, check and see if a router is either SNMP managed or MDM managed, because that might matter whether, what type of execution or what type of call I'm going to do next. So this is done a lot, where we'll send an API call to get the details of a network element or, network elements, and then publish it to a workflow. And then the workflow will look at that data, and then from there decide on what sort of task to do next in a workflow. Okay, so it can be very important. Now, if I run down through this, I'll actually see that I have, you'll see 8 total rows. I have 8 network elements. Now, running over the network supervision, you can actually see I had 2 groups configure network supervision. Here I have 7 network elements and 1 network element. So, if I go into here, and I'm not going to go down through every single network element, I guarantee you that those, if I run down through, you already saw SR6. It's going to go down and it's going to list all of these network elements and all of the details for me. So, in one window, I have all the information that I can now publish to, text file or any application that it's gathered. And, it's obviously much quicker to me going in and looking at the details of each of these network elements, which would take me a little bit more time because I'd have to click on each one individually and then, look at the details and so forth. You can also see that there's, get network elements with filter. Okay, so you can see here, notice it says network supervision REST API. So the actual, most of the API call or endpoint looks identical. Right, so network elements, but all we're doing here is we're adding a filter. Okay, so it's already done the syntax for you. This is great. So you can use this to understand what the syntax may be. So notice it says the filter equals managed state equals managed. Okay, so what is it looking for? It's now this call is going to say, well, only show me the network elements that are managed. Now that's kind of not a very good one in my books as an example, but what we can do here is, and I'm going to show you how we can use the Swagger documentation is, so if I go back to here and I use Swagger, okay, so we can see the Swagger APIs, right? And notice we're using, right, network elements. If you looked at our endpoint, it said, V1 network elements. Okay, so you can see here, V1 get network elements. Okay, let's say network elements. And if you scroll all the way down here, notice it shows us all of the different attributes that are returned when we're looking for a network element. Right, so these are all the different attributes. If you go back and look at the entire request from that initial API request that I looked at, I guarantee you these attributes are in there for every single router that was returned. So there's two real ways that I can figure out, what type of attributes can I filter on. Okay, so what I can actually do is I can actually go and use any of these type of statuses to filter on. Okay, so I can say, for example, I can go back, let's say product. So I know I have some certain products. I have 7750 SRs and I have 7950, I think, XRSs, I think, in this network right now. So what I should be able to do is I should be able to say filter. If we go back here again, notice I have an attribute called product. So let's try this and I can say equals product. Okay, and equals, so I should be able to say 950. Okay, the XRS. Let's see if that works. There we go. So notice now, right, just by using Swagger, so you see how you can manipulate this. I can use Swagger or response from my original API. Okay, and as you can see all the different things I can, I can run APIs on physical links, ports, right? We're just doing it on the actual network element, but it would literally be the exact same way for any of these other objects. So just by using Swagger or, a response from something, I can very quickly manipulate my API calls. So, really, this is a great way of taking the APIs that we have there for you, importing them into Postman, and then using them to really figure out the data that you want. So notice it did actually come back with a 200 OK, which is good for me because I don't have a lot of time here to troubleshoot. And you can see it only came back and it's telling me, hey, you only have the one 7950 XRS in your network. And that's correct, I do. And that's with a system ID of 10.10.10.2. And remember all those nice attributes that were in that Swagger documentation? Well, here they all are here, right? Because the response in Swagger said, well, in my response, I'm going to come back and I'm going to show you all of this great information of these attributes. So that, again, that also tells me that I can filter on all of these attributes, okay? So parameters, same thing. You can enter those filters, by the way, into your parameters if you want. If you don't, typically I like just going up here and changing this. Notice though that the parameter was also here. So, I could have simply left filter there and I could have just went into here and said product and then actually just, edited this variable as such. And then you would have noticed as soon as I change it here, it would have changed up here as well. Now, one thing I can do is in Postman is I've now manipulated this, and I could save this because if I actually go and notice it opens up a separate window. If I go and I close off this window right now, and then I come back and I click on that, it's going to basically go back to what it originally was. So sometimes I may actually want to save this to keep it the way it is. But one thing I also can do is I can duplicate it. So because maybe I want to keep the original, but then I want to actually use this and use it so I could like fool around with it and try some different combinations, but I don't want to fool up the original, right? So I can actually duplicate it. Okay, and you can see it'll actually get duplicated. So you can see network elements with filter copy. I mean, I could rename this to whatever I wish, and now I could literally go in here and I could fool around with this and put in whatever parameters I want and do some testing with it. And I don't really care because if I fool up this guy, I still have my original there, so I can go back and I can just delete this whenever I wish. Okay, so you can see the original is now there for me. So what I would like to do now with the last maybe 5 minutes, and then we'll open up the floor for a few questions, is I'd like to show you a post. So how I can do an actual, some creations and what that will look like as well. So for that, I'm going to go back. And I'm going to go down to, I'll go down to service fulfillment here. So looking at the intent-based engine, okay. And I'm going to input. Use the same thing here, Postman for Windows. Okay, so it should be here now. So there you go. So you can see service fulfillment. Okay, intent type management. So if you understand intent-based service fulfillment, so basically I use a service fulfillment type intent type, and first thing I need to do is I need to import it into the service fulfillment application, which then I can use to create a service template. Then I use that service template to create a service. Okay, so you can see here, one of the first things I can actually do all of this stuff using APIs. So you could literally program all of this stuff using APIs. You can program the entire process, right? Just to give you an example, you can see, here's to import an epipe intent type in IP into IM. So I'm going to use this. I actually have an intent type ready to go. Okay, you can see here my server. This is all ready to go. We know all this is ready to go. Okay, it will actually inherit the bearer code because I was using bearer code. I don't really need to change it. You'll notice though, I now have a body. So this here will be using, if I have a zip file, so an actual intent type that's not already imported into my intent manager, maybe I have it on my laptop in a zip file, I would simply then change this. I will click this and actually click what I'm doing. But what I'm going to use is, you'll see, I'm going to use this one down here, which is import epipe intent type service fulfillment. So it's already in your intent manager, and I'm going to import it. So looking at this actual endpoint, this here would be the name of the intent type, and this is the inversion. So if you understand the intent manager, you have an intent type, and with every intent type, you can have different versions. So if you update it, you can create different versions. Well, if I go into my intent manager, I'm not really going to spend time going into it now. I don't have the time. I will actually see an intent type there called epipe. It'll have a tag on it, and it actually has to have a tag of service fulfillment to be able to used for intent-based service fulfillment, and the version of that intent type will be 1. So if this all matches up, I should be able to send this, and it should automatically import it into the service fulfillment application for me. So that'll actually save me a bunch of time and having to doing all that manually through the UI. Okay, so let's send this. Okay. Now notice I got a different response, right? I got a 201 created. Okay, that's because I'm using a post request now and not a get. So that's a good response though, because it tells me it's been fulfilled and created. And then below it actually gives me the details of everything that was created. So that's great. So now I know it should be in the service fulfillment application, and I should now actually be able to create a service template using that intent type. So notice if I go under epipe, because remember it was an epipe intent type, notice I have an actual API here already ready for you. It says create service template. Okay, so if I click on this guy, again, authorization, I can use as inherit. If I go to my body, notice now in the body, what is this? I'm defining the attributes of my service template. So this is the exact same thing if you were to go into the service fulfillment application and click the button to create a service template. So I'm going to give it a name. I'll call this, I can change this right here. So I'm just going to leave it as is to keep it nice and simple for us. But notice, what intent type am I going to use? Well, I just imported an intent type that was called ePipe and one, because I can have multiple intent types imported into my service fulfillment application. So you need to tell it, which intent type to use. Okay, and then there's some other, service lifecycle, for example. Notice when you create a template, you can actually attach certain workflows to it if you wish. I'm just going to leave all this here right now. Okay, so this actually attaches a workflow called admin up port. So to be honest, this is a little bit of clicking here and moving around with the UI. Okay, so I'm going to send this. This is all ready to go. And notice I got a 201 created back. So very, very quick. So very quickly using 2 API calls, I've really gone in here and I've created a bunch of things in service fulfillment. So with that being said, I'm just going to go to a service fulfillment application, and this will hopefully give you an idea of the power of using APIs and really what you can do with it. Because like I said, you could, wrap up a bunch of API calls using an OSS system or, a workflow manager to do all of this stuff, concurrently or one after another, say, for example. So notice I haven't created a service yet, but if I go into templates and intent type catalog, so here is the intent type that I imported, right? So this was all done, by the way, right? Obviously through that one API call. Okay, notice here's all the values of that. So normally I would have had to say import and then go and fill out all the details. And if I go to service templates, there's my template that's already created for me. So again, this was all done simply through, setting up that API, which actually the API was already set up for us because I downloaded it from the developer portal. And you can see if I edit it. So here's all the different details. Notice, look, even the workflow was assigned successfully for me. If you saw on that API, I said to attach a workflow in that template. All done, all there, all ready to go just by the click of a button using an API. Okay, so now everything is literally ready for me to go to use this service template to now go and create a service, which again can also be done using NSP APIs. So so I don't have any time to really go further in this area. So I hope I've given you at least a glance or an introduction into, the power of NSP APIs. The biggest things, where to go. Do not forget the API developer portal. Great place to go to start using them and playing with them on your own. Postman is a great application, but, of course, you're free to use your own. And labs. So, our programmable network automation course, keep that in mind. It goes much deeper and has a lot of great examples. If you take it, you're gonna come out, knowing a lot more, becoming a lot more familiar with it. And that's about it. Hand it back over to Darren. But I think at this point, maybe we'll see if we have some questions. I guess, Darren, or.
Yeah, thanks, Shane. Yeah, it looks like we do. We have a couple questions here. The first one is from which version of NFMP does location services exist?
That's a great question. Off the top of my head, so all of these APIs, to my knowledge, oh wow, this stuff went right back to, I think, as far as like NSP 19 possibly or 18. It goes back pretty far. I don't know off the top. I can't confirm that off the top of my head now because, like I said, we're in release NSP 22 right now, so it definitely goes back at least 3 or 4 or 5 releases. I know that for sure. The only difference is that actually, location services, yeah, so that goes back really far. Going back releases, though, you might see a lot of less functionality. And when I say functionality, so, if you go into 20.6, you see all of these great examples here. So, if you were to go back, and I know recently this actually used to go right back as far as, 19.6 and so forth. And after so long, they take some of these off their website and they get rid of them. But it actually, all of that stuff was available, I know for sure, way back into 19. So yeah, I mean, again, I could, if you want to know the exact release, you can maybe drop me an email and I can find the exact answer for that for you. But hopefully I've helped you out a little bit with knowing that it does go back at least 3 or 4 releases that I know of.
So next question, how do the different versions of REST API differ? Are there any specific use cases where a particular version is recommended to be used?
So yeah, it's a great question. So without getting too much into it, a lot of that stuff that really goes more deeper into our course. It talks a little bit more about the different versions of REST and REST API. Some of it has to do with some of the attributes and functionalities that are available, and how the architecture and the URLs are laid out. The best way to know what you should use, honestly, is the Swagger documentation. So if you go into the Swagger documentation, or simply by looking at the APIs that we have there for you. So for example, and I'll show you what I mean. If I click on network infrastructure, and this really is the best way to do it. So if I click on service fulfillment right here, I go into Swagger. You'll see right away. I mean, if I open up any of these guys, this probably wasn't the best one actually, because they're still, yeah, this wasn't the best one. They're still in process of doing this. Let me go back quickly to, I think network inventory should be perfect. The network supervision. Yeah, this is going to be good. So let me, network elements. So notice how as soon as I click on this, you see V1. So, I mean, right away, right? Like, I mean, you should be using V1 because this is really how all the APIs in NSP are developed using V1. Now, does that mean you can use V2 or V3? I'm not 100% sure. To be honest, I've never really myself went in and actually experimented with trying to use different versions. I would basically recommend using V1, but to understand to get down into the deeper, differences between all of them, you're probably best just kind of doing up a little Google search, and you'll find that. But we do a little bit more of that actually in the course itself, because it does take a little bit of time to talk about the differences. So, but in order, like I said, to answer the part of knowing which one's best to use, 100% is go in here. Anything you want to do, it'll tell you right away which version you should be using for what part of the NSP.
Okay, next question. The access system based on tokens looks like the ideal target for a DOS or denial of service attack. Is there no protection against somebody eating up all tokens by accident or on purpose?
Well, that's an interesting one. I've never heard anybody talk about that before, but my understanding is that the whole idea of the reason for using the whole token access authentication system, as opposed to just a simple user password, I believe, was an enhanced security mechanism designed a little bit around whole attacks. So that was my understanding of that whole type of authentication system. Whereas a typical using a user password type system all the time is generally an easier mechanism for DDoS attacks and stuff of that nature. So that was my understanding. But I mean, to be honest, as everyone's aware, we live in a world where people are always trying to figure out attacking certain mechanisms. But again, I mean, my understanding was the actual token-based mechanism was. But so here's the other thing, though, right? Using login and password systems also has limits. So what I say is, when you purchase NSP system, your license key has certain operator licenses. So if you also get in there and say if you're licensed for only three positions or 4 or 5 positions, if you're constantly logging in as admin user or whatever, using or admin credentials using an actual API request, you're using one of those sessions. So that's you can still eat up the limits using some type of attack using that nature as well. So to be honest, I don't know. I'm not an expert on the whole underlying authorization of REST and REST API, but like I said, the only thing is I do know that the whole bearer token thing is supposed to be an enhanced security mechanism, and that's why you get that long bearer code which is encoded, and the different security mechanism they use there.
Okay, we've run a little over time here, but I think if you have time, Shane, we'll take a few more questions here and then we'll
Yeah,
close
I
things
mean, I
off.
for sure, for sure. And I mean,
Okay.
like I said, if any other questions or if I wasn't totally clear on something, anybody wants a little bit of follow up, I mean, I'm more than happy to, you can send me an email. And I have great contacts, so I can maybe get a more solid answer for you.
Okay, I'm going to share your email address just because you said that.
No, seriously, yeah. I mean, I like to think I try and get back to as soon as as soon as I can. But obviously we're all busy and we have certain things to do. But I'll try my best, right? So, but yeah, I mean, go
Cool.
ahead,
Thanks,
Darren. I
Shane.
mean, any more questions?
Um,
I'm good. So,
okay. So another question here, in order to switch from classic NFM or SAM, can the end user utilize off-the-box APIs?
off the box, I don't know if I probably need clarification on that. So, all of these APIs in my mind are off the box. It's already like built in, installed, and already in the product. Like this is not really anything extra you purchase. And so, I mean, just as long as you purchase the correct um, licensing like software suite. So in that, what I mean is, so when you purchase the NSP product, you basically get, the standard software suite, which includes, all your fault management, network supervision, service supervision, all that stuff. So, I mean, that means right away you have access to all of, you be able to run APIs like out of the box on all of that type of functionality, right? Vault management, network supervision, and all that, and some other functionality that comes with that suite. But if you didn't purchase the, say programming suite, which includes, workflow manager and intent manager, well, I mean, obviously you didn't purchase it, you're not licensed for it, so no, you're not going to have access to running APIs in that area. So, but I mean, anything you purchased or you're licensed for, I mean, in my mind, out of the box, yeah, like you should have access to it today, like right now. If it's, you should be able to go in and start running APIs
But
just
there's
as
no
long as.
maybe no pre-configured stuff, or I
No,
don't
there's
even know if
not.
that. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
The only real thing is, so your admin user obviously is your easiest one to use because it has access to anything. The only other thing you would need to configure is that if you create another user that's not an admin user, there's if you go into the user, so when you set up the users and user accounts, there's an option in there, and I believe I don't know the name of it off the top of my head now, but I believe it has something. It says something like OSS access or northbound interface or something. I believe it's like OSS activity or OSS, but the user basically needs that applied to them. They need access to that option. So, if you have a different user, obviously you don't want to give admin to everybody, and so if you have a different user, you just need to make sure that whoever created you that user, they give you that functionality. And again, if you want to know exactly what that is, you can send me an email. I can find you the exact option. I probably should know it, but if you've ever done user accounts in the NSP, there's so many different options you can select. So I forget some of them sometimes, but it really is just as long as you select that one option, and you should have access to those APIs right away. So I hope that answers that.
Okay. Yeah. And yeah, someone was saying they've been using APIs for years and they picked up some good hints that they were struggling with. So thanks for that
Nice.
feedback.
Yeah. Excellent. Perfect.
Um, I don't believe we have any additional questions, so it's probably a good time to wrap things up right now. As I said,
Sounds
we
good.
will send you the recording. I also dropped a link in the chat to leave an evaluation. Let us know what you thought. Hopefully, it was a good use of your time. Thanks a lot, Shane. And as I said, yeah, in a couple days, I'll send an email with the recording. So thanks for everyone for joining, and have yourself a great rest of your day.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye.